This will put nice hormones and vitamins into this bubbling oxygenated water, which will help stimulate the root growth of these nice young clones. We have the rock wool, and we even have one over here with lava rock and a peat cup. These clones will grow for approximately 2 weeks, develop nice roots, and then be moved into larger containers into the pre-flowering area. We will now take the 10 seedling female plants that came,
or perhaps even Jesus. Jesus came from Nazareth.
But all that is about to change. The King of France, Philip IV, called Philippe le Bel, or Philip the Fair, has summoned Templar leaders from throughout Europe to his kingdom. He calls a meeting to discuss a possible merger of the Templars with other military orders. The Templars' supreme commander, Grand Master
pressure sodium. Well, don't you know, it's cloning time again, and we have a really beautiful clone to take right here.
And brought a very large number of knights with him and a large treasure train, and arrived in Paris in 1307. And
trim, and then dip. I think that's it about right there. Leave that in there for about 10-15 seconds if you wish. And for this little beauty, let's try the styrofoam method. And there we are. A few weeks have gone by, and we notice in our cloning area that some of our clones have developed some really nice roots. What this means is that these clones are ready to be transplanted into larger containers and moved over to the pre-flowering area. That also means we will be cloning our second 10, the last of the 20 of our young seedlings that we kept. Let's do that.
It was pretty fashionable to charge people with devil worship at the time.
The charges are familiar. They had been leveled against Pope Boniface VIII just 4 years before by
not worthy to baptize you. And Jesus says it's the will of God for both of us.
It was a concern of the gospel writers that Jesus should be infant.
And there we have a transplanted clone ready to go into the pre-flowering area, where it will grow for 2 weeks under 18 hours a day, 400-watt metal halide. It will grow to be about 12 to 14 inches tall and then moved over into the blooming area.
Are vulnerable. It has been 16 years since the last disastrous battles in the Holy Land, when
or rock wool or whatever into these larger containers, that the top of the small container is a little bit above the ridge line right here, because as you remember, this is where our water line will be. And we're going to flood this area and make sure that our clones start off with a nice nutrient water. Let's just pour some lava rocks around here. Okay, let's get that leaf out of there. There we are. This young clone is ready to begin its 2-week regime under the 18-hour.
He must have heard John's teaching and absorbed quite a bit of John's teaching. They seem to be on the same wavelength.
They can be taken out of their baskets, and we can put the plant, just the roots, into the pre-flowering area.
John, not Jesus. It was before Jesus. Now, the fact that almost all Christians in an international quiz would say, that's Jesus.
We are placing our first 10 young parent seedlings into the blooming area. These seedlings are, of course, all female. You will notice that the bedding area here in the blooming area is covered. We do that because we want to keep the light off of the...
All Jesus' teachings may have actually originated with John the Baptist.
Jesus'
which has championed the order for nearly 2 centuries. But the reigning Pope, Clement V,
Lord's Prayer.
One of his disciples asked Jesus,
will be right at the bottom edge of the line right there. We'll be keeping the water level identical here as to the water level that we had over in the pre-flowering area. However, these plants will receive only 12 hours a day of 1,000 watt high pressure sodium. This 1,000 watt high pressure sodium runs along this 6-foot rail.
give us each day our daily bread. Forgive us our sins, for we too forgive all who do us wrong. And
Realized in 1229 by the Church to root out heretics in southern France, the medieval Inquisition is a group of experienced interrogators and clergy, placed at the disposal of any European monarch who enjoys papal favor.
The main rule for the Inquisition was not to draw blood, so they could do pretty much anything except cut somebody, so they would do things like hold,
and the blooming area are separated by this sliding door. The air is blown from the cloning area through a fan.
From the weight of your own body. Other ones would have been toes, feet roasted over a slow fire.
That is exclusive to the teaching of Jesus in the New Testament, and it is not found in...
When the plants move around and create cellulose inside the stem, it makes the plants much stronger. The blooming room also has this nice oscillating...
Paris, 105 admit they denied Christ during their secret Templar initiations. 103
down this duct and is sent out the floor of the blooming room.
this the cross.
A lot of the accusations against the Templars concern what went on in their initiation ceremonies. It's because the Catholic Church only allowed certain kind of rituals to be performed within.
And so they couldn't overlap. They should reach as many Jews as possible.
but that theory raises a provocative question.
Outside of the confessions, there is no proof of wrongdoing, no physical evidence, and no witnesses.
The thing
From the 1st century and earlier, it's being used as a place of ritual washings and activities.
Trim dip and then plant into the cloning area. And let's turn the bubbles up in there. There we are.
Excavations continued in the Suba Cave throughout 2001.
Moved all but one of the second part of the 20, the last 10 of the parent seedlings have been cloned and will now be placed here into the blooming area. We now have 20 plants in the blooming area.
Master and Geoffrey de Charnay, the Templar master of Normandy, both proclaim their innocence. That evening, around 6 p.m., a fire is kindled near the River Seine.
and we will move pre-flowers into this blooming area. Until then, let's take a look at some of the working parts of the blooming area. This reservoir in the blooming area, as you can see, has a pump that is submerged in the water and has a tube which goes up and will feed
A cave that's practical.
After 2 seasons,
Before he died, he cursed the King of France and the Pope.
King Philippe le Bel
is controlled by this timer. This timer stays off for 3 hours and then comes on for half an hour. We'll see this in action in just a moment. The bottom reservoir, as you can see, is made of nothing but 2x4s and the bottom piece, which is a thin piece of plywood. I scrounged the 2x4s and I bought the plywood. I put this on wheels, and as you can see, I have a handle here and a handle here. This allows me to pull the bed out.
It is just one of the questions that will be explored throughout the centuries to come. A more
outlandish.
One of the people that came out is Ari Shimron, who knows plastered facilities and reservoirs and mikvahs better than anyone in Israel, maybe better than anyone on earth.
I immediately had my suspicions about the age of the plaster, simply from the way it looked.
And he said
6 mil plastic in the bottom reservoir is thick enough to hold the water. I use clear plastic so that I can see if there are any leaks.
100 years BC.
It seems such a ridiculous notion that Dr. Gibson immediately dismissed his colleague.
In the blooming area, we will be using Flora Bloom and Flora Micro.
So I sort of looked at it, I said, wow. Well, that's very interesting. You know, I didn't want to be rude. So I said, very interesting. I'll think about that. And we'll be in contact. And so he went away, and we resumed our excavations.
pH meter in the blooming room. We will try to keep the pH the same in this room as in the cloning room, 6.3. We will, of course, need
Counted in the works of the ancient Jewish historian Josephus Flavius, as well as in all 4 Gospels. Herod had had John arrested, put in chains, and imprisoned on the count of Herodias, the wife of his brother Philip. That was because John
1,200 to 1,500 parts per million. You will want to keep your water temperature between 65 degrees and 75 degrees at all times. Never refill your reservoir, say after cleaning, with water less than 65 degrees. You will not want to have your pH below 5.8 or ever above 6.8. You will try to keep the pH as close to 6.3 as you can. Your pH will be adjusted with regular old pH up or pH down in the blooming area.
the equivalent of traveler's checks, safety deposit boxes, letters of credit, and large cash loans.
Flower. The plants that are in this area won't be here for too long. They'll be here while they're developing roots or while they're germinating.
There was a church law against charging interest, so they didn't charge interest, they charged rent. It was a neat little euphemism.
To keep the water fresh and oxygenated, we have this little aquarium set up. It's a very simple aquarium pump.
Swears he will give her anything she wishes. At the urging of her mother, Salome asks that John the
Valves here, I can adjust 3 different areas. One for this little tank, one for this little tank, and one.
The death of John, according to the Gospels, is all rather dramatic. I myself would see it more in line with a folk tale rather than history. There are various elements of the tale that we have which hark back to the book of...
We have our thermometer, tells us the temperature. I've put everything into these clear plastic containers simply so we could see through them and you could see what was going on with the roots and it'd be a little bit more visual. However, when you use these trays yourself, you may want to consider these black trays like this right here. That way less light will be shining on your roots and your roots will develop quicker. Like I say, I've used these clear ones just so we could see what was going on. Let's take a look at the reservoir down at the bottom.
Account recorded by Josephus Flavius.
According to Josephus, John did not level any...
Up to the tray above. Every 6 hours or so, the tray needs to be flooded. You will want to experiment with your particular area and your particular setup.
He caused any trouble. It was a preemptive strike. He knew that John was gathering this great crowd of people in the wilderness by the River Jordan, and that just spelled trouble.
In his account of John's death, Josephus records that the baptizer was beheaded within the walls of the Black Fortress,
or actual remains.
That ties in also with the belief about relics and the inherent power of the saints.
With a sprawling set of ruins called Qasar el-Mineshke, set high above the Dead Sea. Through the centuries, scholars have debated whether such a lonely outpost would have been an appropriate place for Herod Antipas to reside.
But some suspect that the relic was not from just any saint, but from perhaps the most famous.
Excavated the traditional site of Machaerus.
The palace of Herod Antipas is in a very bad state of deterioration. In fact, all that can be seen today are the foundations of stone walls. Some of the carvings which were found in these excavations are quite interesting. They've been
in Antioch, in Rome, in southern France. We don't really know.
Did the Templars have the real...
elaborate. In fact, what you have to imagine here, a very magnificent series of rooms and chambers and courtyards with beautiful frescoes on walls, marble benches, and...
ground tube next to it is ample enough to handle any overflow that might come. The reason we have the overflow is exactly at the height so that it brings the water right up to the rim where I want it to be on all of my containers. Now, if I want to raise the water level in the tank, I simply take this top there we are. I simply take that top, put it right there, and now the water level will rise about 1.5 inches before the overflow begins. Now I can screw this device down into the plastic tube, so I have about 1.5 inches that I can play with.
Fragment of that paving that has survived. This is the only public space within that palace.
They might have discovered that during the sack of Constantinople in 1204 during the Fourth Crusade.
Retrieved this from the East, brought it back to Europe and used it as part of their rituals.
That would have been perfect for use as a prison cell.
Well, this is the first time that I've been in...
Soldiers made their notorious raids on Friday the 13th. Is it the contents of the Templar...
This reservoir, this water cistern. Well, in those days, cisterns, especially empty cisterns, were used as prisons.
Calibration solution, which will calibrate your tester and allow you to determine at any given moment what nutrients are in the water. As the nutrient...
Whatever their real goal, there is little evidence the king gained much from the arrests.
King Philippe didn't benefit as much as he thought he might have done. Obviously, his considerable debt to the Knights Templar was wiped out, but it certainly didn't solve his finance.
Which calibrates your pH meter and allows you to get a proper pH reading. And we'll be showing you how to do that a little bit later on. As different nutrients are used up in the water and the pH changes, you may need to adjust your pH either up or your pH down. And these are the chemicals you will use to do that. You can only adjust your pH for about a week, and then you'll have to change your water. So we'll be changing the water of our system down in our reservoir and cleaning our area once a week. That means removing your plants and totally wiping and cleaning both upper and lower reservoirs. Clean your pump, your tubing, and everything.
No money. The records of the order seem to have disappeared.
That was the most prominent feature that we found.
What it looks like is you turn your back to the wall.
A fan of some type blowing on your pre-flowers. The movement of the plant creates intense cellulose growth within the stem of the plant and makes for strong, sturdy, healthy
Pressure, and it runs down the little trough onto the foot. Definitely looks like some sort of ceremonial thing.
Charnay was the preceptor of Normandy. He was burnt at the stake along with Jacques de Molay.
This stone with its foot impression is a unicum. There is nothing like it in Israel, as far as I know.
Dr. Gibson was particularly intrigued.
right after I turn it off. And then the exhaust fan draws the CO2, which is mixed in the air, out and out of the room. The CO2 stimulates tremendous growth in this small room. Even without having a device which tells me the parts per million in the air, I can tell just by watching the growth of my plants when I don't use the CO2 every couple of hours that it definitely helps them. You may also purchase a CO2 emitter which emits just enough CO2 and has a regulator on it which keeps the parts per million just about where you want it, which is about 1,200 parts per million.
In the hills around Jerusalem in the 1st century, but included people who had different views of how these rituals.
1005, 1006 parts per million of vegetative nutrients. That's just about where I want it. You may want to start with somewhere around 7, and you want to go up to as high as 12 or so. Keep yourself balanced around there, and you won't have any problems with your young tree flowers or your mamas.
Connected to the medieval Knights Templar.
To this day, they have never been deciphered. But if...
And the preparation of the dead for burial. After his execution, Scripture tells us that the body of John the Baptist was taken away by his disciples and prepared for a secret burial.
There's a bit of a mystery as to where John the Baptist was buried. In a sense, he should have been buried either close to his hometown, in this case in Carrum, or at the place where he was killed, in this case Macarius, where he was beheaded by Herod Antipas.
To keep nice, healthy, well-fed foliage, make sure that you change the water in your pre-flowering area once a week. Make sure you clean your air.
Most other countries at first were very reluctant to prosecute.
So it did vary from area to area, depending on the strength of the church.
Those that do try the Templar.
About 2 days prior to changing the water in my pre-flowering area, I like to give my plants a nice foliar feeding of this earth juice. It's an essential spray. Essential spray means that it has all sorts of nice essentials, vitamins, minerals, trace elements, micronutrients.
Pagan city with some Samaritans. Jews did not live in Samaria in pagan cities.
In Portugal, where Templar built towns and castles held off the Moors for decades, they simply changed their name from the Knights Templar to the Knights of Christ.
Being associated with Samaria Sebasta, and the idea was to then bring...
I wait till right before I'm going to change the water is because this is a 100% organic and it will grow fast in the water. So we'll spray it.
Aaron, and perhaps this is the reason why John the Baptist was taken there. Otherwise, we have a mystery without any kind of solution.
Today,
I like to start my pre-flower area out with a nice misting of just plain water on the pre-flowers, on these nice big pre-flowers on the mamas. They really like that.
So my archaeological surveyor, Fadi Amira, made the trip through the occupied territories at the heart of the Intifada, the Palestine.
Into the blooming area. They will harvest in about 8 weeks. These 10 plants over here have been in the blooming area about 2 weeks. They will harvest in about 6 weeks. These plants have been in the blooming area about 5 weeks or so. For this one here, and about 6 weeks for this one over here. The plant on the left here is a slower blooming breed than the one on the right. The blooming area fills up just like the pre-flowering area does. The pump downstairs, down in...
Better for hiding what remained of the Templar treasure than in that region.
While there is no proof of the Templars escaping into the Alps with their treasures,
only to the first ring about an inch below the level of the lava rocks. This overflow will prevent any water from getting any higher in this tank than we want it to get. Remember,
now the Samaritans did not practice ossuary burial, and since the original tomb clearly has ossuary burial within it, that strengthens the possibility that this tomb was in use in the early 1st century AD, but also that it would
send some 5,000 heavily armed knights to secure the region. But an ambush is waiting.
We will show you now how to fertilize.
Fighting men in Europe, but before that point there's no evidence whatsoever that they were anything other than farmers.
Fours, plywood, and plastic. It is also on rollers, which makes it real easy to pull out from underneath the upper bed in order to maintenance. The blooming area has a fan which exchanges the air about once totally every couple of hours. So what I do is I turn on this little heater on low about once every couple of hours for about 10 minutes. It'll build up the parts per million of CO2 in this room to about 1,500, 1,200. I'll turn it off after
battles they fought.
Could they have been the remnants
after the device is turned off? Any fertilizer is added directly to the reservoir.
Did the Templars and their
million. I like to keep the parts per million up close to around 1,200 in the blooming area, because in the blooming area the plants use up a lot of energy making those buds.
Time of Paul in the 50s AD in Asia Minor at Ephesus. Followers of John that don't even accept Jesus. And Luke says, well, we met them and we quickly taught them the truth and they were back.
We like to keep our reservoirs covered. Here I'm just using some sheets of styrofoam. We do this for a couple of reasons. For one reason, you want to keep dust and bugs out. Another reason is you want to keep the light off of the nutrient solution. The light will facilitate the growth of microorganisms, algae, and things like this, and we don't want that going on in our reservoir. This reservoir also has this nice, really long...
They are followers of John the Baptist, and they never, in their history...
...for this, and it goes into the cloning area and hooks into our device, which bubbles the clones. See how easy this rolls back and forth? That makes it easy to clean and easy to tend to. You can see the wind pushing those little plants around. That's the oscillating fan. It will make sure that our plants are nice and strong because the movement of the plants back and forth from...
Dr. Tabor pondered what insight they might provide into the mysteries of the Suba Cave.
I would like to...
As the reservoir fills up, these 10, 20, 30 plants will be receiving nutrients from the water that comes up from the reservoir. We will keep the parts per million around 900 to 1200. These last plants over here are ready to be harvested. They have, for the last 2 weeks, been growing in the wick system. The wick system.
And we're starting to build an entire fleet. One account from October 12th...
to some rituals that we've lost track of because they didn't pass wholly into the Christian church.
Or what they were carrying.
The Templars could have taken the treasure in their fleet almost anywhere.
One likely escape route is to the north, to one...
That did not come from nowhere.
Your plants, the last 2 weeks, they will be clean and free of chemicals, and they will have that nice, sweet, organic taste.
King Robert the Bruce in 1306, the same pope who condemned the Templars, also decreed that Scotland was no...
In just a minute. I have removed the protective light cover so you can see exactly how this area floods. The pump and the overflow work in unison.
Bruce in his fight for independence.
There is a long-standing legend which...
And will be fed every time the water comes to the top, which is once every 3 hours. These plants will use up certain nutrients in the water, and that will change the pH of the water. We can use pH up and pH down to keep the pH about 6.3 where we want it to be. But after...
numbered the Scots by about 3 to 1.
To date,
these buds in the back have been in their special wick hydroponic atmosphere, which cleans them up and takes out all of the nutrients which were put in here.
or as some translate the name, St. Clair, the family that plays a key role in the Da Vinci Code.
The Sinclair family has long been associated with the Templars because they were one of the first families to give land grants to the Templars when they came back from the Holy Land in the 1120s.
Ancient architects cleverly mined out the center level of the rock to form the giant cave.
They simply left the upper geological layer as the ceiling and the lower geological layer as the floor, and then carved out the interior. And so the only chisel marks that we have are on the side walls. The side walls, as
to prevent any overflow on the top tank, simply returns the water down below here into the reservoir.
quicklime and burnt in the sort of exterior part of the cave, brought into the cave, mixed with water, and then was used to coat the walls. The idea that the plaster would then allow the cave to be impervious so that water wouldn't simply accumulate in it.
Served as a regional repository of medieval knowledge.
What was called a scriptorium in ancient times.
To the Iron Age, Dr. Gibson called for extensive independent tests to corroborate his findings. Sheepishly, he recontacted Dr. R.E.A. Shimron, whose initial dating of the cave to the Iron Age
to this larger container here and fill it with vermiculite. This container will then sit in this plastic container, which will be the reservoir, and these wicks will match up with the wicks that I will put in this larger container. Now, allow me to demonstrate that for you. The first thing I will do is take the container that the plant will be sitting in and put some wicks in it, which will match up with the wicks that are in the smaller container. And there will be a continuation of each other. I will put about 2 or 3 inches of lava rock in the bottom of it. Next, I will put in a few inches of this fine-grade vermiculite. Our plant has been placed in the bucket, and we will now fill it up with more vermiculite until it gets about right here. The vermiculite will suck up the water from those wicks and give a nice, moist atmosphere in this container. You can water this from the top once every couple of days. This will be our reservoir for our container. I will take this small cup and put it in the bottom of the reservoir. That way, when I sit this container into the reservoir, it will not go all the way down to the bottom of the reservoir. Now you see we have our wicks here. The wicks go into the reservoir and into the water. The reservoir will only be filled up about 2 inches, but below the level of this. So this never touches the water. This goes into the reservoir. You can simply pick this up, look in there, see if your reservoir needs to be filled. You really only need to fill it once every 2 or 3 days. Like I say, you can water from the top here. The seltzer water, and then once every couple of days, I give them a misting of the essentials and the trace elements and nutrients. The last 4 days.
I'm actually standing on the latest of the occupational levels. This is a floor which dates
trace elements, no essentials, the last 4 days. That way, the plant will use up all its natural, stored up nutrients that are in these fan leaves here, and it will go to the buds, and they'll turn this light color just like they do in autumn. And there you have it, the wick system. This system will clean up your buds.
So I'm going to jump back in time. Oh. So I'm going to make another jump
out of them and give you a bud and a plant that has a really nice, sweet taste. This is still a hydroponic setup. This is just the slowest of the hydroponic methods.
The floor where I'm standing to the time of John the Baptist himself. And on these floors we had these circular installations, the foot anointing
flowers in the cloning area. This plant will grow like this for about 2 more weeks, and when the bud gets really nice and ripe, it will be harvested.
And then what's interesting is that within this 150-year sort of period, these activities are maintained. It's not as if in one period, let's say at the time of John the Baptist, you have
in solution over here, and we put it in these special buckets. These buckets have this much plain water in them. These wicks go down into the water.
John the Baptist, late 1st century BC, early 1st century AD, and all the way up to the mid-2nd century AD.
But the hardest question still remained. What did it all mean? With the principal excavations of the
reservoir about this deep. You water this about once every 3 days. The water, if you water from the top, the water will sink down and fill up to about right here on the bottom. You can look in here and see when your water's getting low. If the water goes completely dry for a day and this is still wet, you need not fill up the reservoir.
A very tragic one for historians. We simply do not have the Central Templar Archive. It disappeared after the suppression 1312.
Of essentials and micronutrients. The last 4 days that these plants are in these containers before they're harvested, I spray them only with plain water.
Sometime around the time of John the Baptist, and this is crucial, that reservoir in the front third purposely is taken out of use. That is, someone wants to go in there and use the water in the back, but have the front part to stay dry.
When so much has been lost, it is inevitable that attempts will be made to fill the void left behind.
Naturally would if it were autumn. They are changing color because they are not being fed nutrients like the other 30 plants in the blooming area. The food leaves are using the last of their stored reserves of energy.
Some a little bit more speculative, and some way out there.
Some believe that the Templars had the navigational skills to take their treasure and escape almost anywhere.
Let's summarize the basic concepts. Once you determine the gender of your parent seedlings, you keep some of your best females and turn them into perpetual clone machines. That is because every 2 weeks, you take as many clones as you need from these mamas. In 2 weeks, when those clones develop roots, they are moved to the pre-flower area and placed into larger containers.
Baptism, like at Easter or something like that. And then you begin to get into your Crusader and your Turkish and your modern period, and we can't say were people still coming in, because that time you'd have to be leaning down like this to get in. I'm thinking after.
Remember, you must have a plant which fully blooms in 8 weeks. Most good strains will do this in a hydroponic system such as this. Check your parts per million every day first, then adjust your pH if necessary. Check your reservoir every day and keep it always full. You will want to be extremely careful when using water and electricity together.
Normans are always thought of as being French, but actually the word Norman comes from Norseman, and these were people from Norway.
Not at all. People grow hydroponically all over the world. These buds are all about 16 to 17 inches tall.
It's this kind of speculation that leads Templar treasure hunters to extend their search to some unlikely and isolated spots, like Oak Island, just off the eastern coast of Nova Scotia, in Canada's Mahone.
John the Baptist himself. Why did they choose this cave? Well, I think they chose this cave.
And it's pretty wide too. The hydroponic sea of green. Follow the simple instructions, and this is what your room will look like once every 2 weeks.
floors, and I was able to get down to those Roman levels. And lo and behold, what do I find down there but evidences of...
There was a man-made structure. They found logs in certain patterns. They found fill that had been put in place.
Though reports vary, the most common claim is that the pit contains layers of logs and stones placed at 10-foot intervals. The teens eventually give up on the pit.
It's time for my favorite part.
Somewhere in this time period, a stone covered with coded symbols is said to be found, though it has since vanished.
Not surprisingly, that suggestion draws a firestorm of controversy.
Isn't that a beauty? Ah, yes.
If the Asuba, I would be very hesitant about putting John the Baptist in that area in terms of his mission, because in the Gospels it states...
Okay, let's take this little beauty here. Ah, yes. Again, another choice product. This nice, young, healthy, single-stalk bush took less than 8 weeks to reach maturity once placed in the blooming area.
We don't have enough information on his activity, but what we have is that he immersed people in the Jordan River.
This three-headed beauty is ready to go.
The criticism does not faze Dr. Gibson.
There are some archaeologists who will never be convinced by anything. I mean, after all, everything can be questioned. What do you expect me to find within such a cave? An inscription saying, I, John the Baptist, was here, I baptized people, and I've left this message for future archaeologists. No, you're going to find the sort of things that we found here, such as...
Also, if it's a leaf that's sticking out, trim it. There we go. The really small leaves that have the glistening
1990s. But the impasse may be about to end.
2 men now in their 80s have recently agreed to resolve their years of arguments and have decided to sell the island to new interests. And so a whole new generation of people are going to be looking around for that treasure.
The saga of the Oak Island treasure, like the legends of the...
This lovely little 16-inch bush has 4 nice, really big, luscious tops to it. Let's just trim that one up a little bit. Again, you just trim off all of the larger food leaves and some of the smaller food leaves, and then trim across the top of the real small leaves, just like you'd give them a haircut. This plant was pinched when it was really young, once or twice, I'm not sure. But that gave it these really nice 4 heads. Each one of these heads is a really tight little bud. I like to refer to this type of a plant as a single-stalked bush.
Appropriate for the Byzantine period. So just in terms of the levels, I'm concerned.
Dr. Taylor is particularly suspicious of one engraving.
1.5 inches wide each. This one 15-inch plant will give a little over 1/2 of an ounce. Let's just trim that thing up now. And there we are, just like magic. The really nice plants seem to trim themselves. Regardless of how much time it takes to trim your plants, be sure to trim them well before drying. We've trimmed up our really nice megabuds, and now we'll take them and hang them in the closet. We'll put our trimmings away and save them to make butter, oil, or flour.
Other experts question the uniqueness of the Suba cave. Does it really differ?
Right, are the ones we just trimmed. They will hang here for about 3 weeks, then they will be ready to smoke. These plants on the left have been in here for about 3 weeks.
Actually, it meets the requirements of a mikveh. It even meets in this respect that it has steps to enter. So originally...
To the
hardcore punk music.
It's almost like every age has their own spin on the Templars, and that's sort of a reflection of that particular age.
Why, after more than 7 centuries, does the investigation and the speculation continue?
Because the human animal...
And we have this pipe. A lot of people these days are preferring to smoke their marijuana in small water pipes like this. You can put ice cold water in, have you a bowl full, and then change the water. The cool water cools the smoke, and the cool smoke is definitely healthier on your lungs than hot smoke. The first thing you'll want to do is take one of these nice dried buds and cut all of the little buds off of the stem. This bud has been drying
at the stake or cooked over a slow fire.
A lot of it has to do with the loss of the Central Archive because we don't have the essential records.
Cool, you know, that would be a typical mikveh for me. But there is no wall 3 meters into the stairway. The wall is 24.
Like this will go into the pipe much better. Plus you might even find a little stem inside each one of these individual little buds that you don't want to be smoking. Ah, there it is right there. We'll just clean that off a little bit and we'll discard it. We will now take some of our nice cut up megabuds and we'll put it into the pipe. See how easy